Today, I would like to welcome back James Crook, who was my guest from episode 62, also happens to be my business and life partner. And today we're going to be talking about some different challenges. So welcome, James.
Fantastic to be here again. Thank you.
Woohoo! Hey, so you've been in business for our entire adult and married life, I think. Would that be about right?
Yeah, pretty much. So at the same time as having some normal employed jobs, I have run my own business since like year 2000 or something like that. So quite a long time by now.
22 years, which means we've got, and I think I'm the same. So I think we've got combined 40 plus years experience in business.
Gosh.
That's a lot. That's more than I am in age.
Some would say too much.
So maybe. So what I wanted, obviously in our last episode, we talked a bit about some of the past challenges that you experienced through your past business when you ran a design agency. And today we thought we would have a talk a bit more about COVID and the impact that had on you personally over the last couple of years, but particularly in 2020. So I would love it if you could maybe share, I guess, where were you at before the pandemic hit? Where was your head at, particularly in relation to business and just life in general?
Sure. It's a bit hard to remember, isn't it? Stuff that happened pre-COVID seems like so long ago. And I know everyone has their own stories and their own journey through COVID. So I guess what I want to share is just some of my bits and pieces, but different people will probably relate to it in different ways for themselves. And we also can't necessarily just think that this is the past. COVID and the changes it's made in our world are still going on, right? We're still kind of dealing with a lot of that. Pre-COVID, running the business with you, we at that point had been running the coaching business together for 3 years, maybe 4 years. I personally didn't even realize how goal-driven I was in the kind of way that I would run my life and my internal dialogue. Obviously, we have business goals, we had personal goals to do different things. And what I kind of found was over time, over the experience of lockdowns and of our changing world over several months and even years, that is probably the thing that I found the most difficult to grab hold of, is how suddenly the environment around me was shifted in a way that made it seem like it was impossible to meet the goals that I had had. And without even realizing it, so much of my personal energy and space and who I told myself I was related to working towards those goals, whether they were business or personal or wealth goals or whatever they are, all those different things. And so it was really challenging for me. Yeah.
And so what did you notice? When did the kind of, I guess, when did that, no, not slippery slope, maybe it's the wrong word, but when did it start to when did you start to realize for yourself that the way that the world was changing was not in alignment with your highest goals? Which kind of sounds, and I don't mean to minimize that or to make it sound selfish, but we have set goals for a long time. We've been doing this work for 8 or 9 years in our own businesses first. And the meme is that we didn't know, no one said in 2015, oh, look forward to 2020, I can't wait. That was not on our goals board at all. So I guess what were the first kind of signs for you that something was a bit amiss in relation to how you had normally shown up and done life?
Yeah, it's funny looking back on it. There's like different phases I think of myself going through across that time. When everything was very first happening and there was a lot of disruption, a lot of fear, we had that first set of lockdowns, the economy was in free fall. There was a whole lot of stuff going on that was quite scary and stressful and fearful for everyone. We were worried about our health and safety. At that point, there was very little information about what it all meant. However, at the time, it was almost like our role in our business, and my role specifically, was very clear. It's like we just need to get as much information as we can for our audience, feed that through to them, and try and keep everyone calm. That was kind of how I thought about it anyway. It's like, let's just bring a certain level of calm and direction to this whole thing. We didn't know what was going to happen or what was going on. So maybe some of that I was even a bit too positive, a bit more positive than I should have been. But it wasn't so much about looking for solutions at that point. It was just about saying, let's not panic and do crazy things. Let's just look for a way through. And then, of course, we started teaching our clients how to go online and create stuff that they could actually sell and do online, and looking at other business models and bits and pieces with them. So it was way different and way more work than what we had done previously for less money too, because lots of people couldn't pay and it was that ripple impact was going on everywhere. But internally, although it was stressful, I had good direction. I kind of knew what I wanted to achieve for myself and my clients in the short term. And it was almost like, there's all this stress and disruption going on, but this is my time. I can stand up, I can deal with this. And as it went on, and it just keeps going and going and going, and we did get government support for different people in different areas. And here where we are in Australia, I know it was different across other parts of the world as well, but we had very long lockdown periods where we were. So stuck inside, kids are home from school, all sorts of stuff going on. It was like a new routine started, but that new routine felt a little bit pointless and endless. So it's like, how do our goals get met in this routine? Well, they kind of don't. All that direction that happened at the start is kind of petering out, and now we're just all kind of trying to figure out what's actually going on and how long is this going to last and what's going to happen next. And it was almost like the uncertainty for me personally was deeper at that point than it was right at the start, because I just didn't have that kind of direction and what I should be doing, what my response should be. And the growth from that for me was really, as I kind of mentioned, realizing how much I actually do want to know what's going to happen. I wouldn't have thought of myself as being like that before. Like I've got goals. Yeah, I want to plan stuff, but I wouldn't have said to myself, that is going to really, really rock me if I don't have that. I just thought it was part of a bigger spectrum. But yeah, it turns out quite goal-driven, quite attached to plans and wanting to make them work and that kind of thing. When they were all kind of ripped out from under us and not much choice in how it worked, it deeply impacted how I felt every day.
So what did you, talk us through, what did you start to do when you had that realization? We're pretty self-aware and we're in personal development, so this is our jam. What did you kind of, look, first of all, I think it's normal to break down before we break through. So obviously there was, and I was living with you, so I remember that there was a season of just like, this is just all rubbish and it's tough. And we would call that a shaking of the hairbrush moment, or check your pulse, you're human. And, we all have meltdowns and tantrums in different ways. On the other side of that for you, what did you start to implement? What kind of strategies, and what did you put in place, I guess, to help you be able to deal with the chaos that was happening in the external world?
It is strange to think about it going back and the different things that happened in behaviors or activities and in my internal world. One of the not so positive reactions that I had was I got very, very frustrated with money goals. Now, I know lots of people all over the world have felt the same, so I'm not alone in that. But I really felt like, we've tried for so long to build this business and now it's all just gone backwards and blah, 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 blah. A lot of that wasn't even really that true, or it wasn't as true as it seemed to me in that moment. But that was a real frustration for me and a real sense of loss. I felt almost like stages of grief going through that for that loss of those dreams and those visions that I felt like I was working towards. I actually went and saw a therapist, a hypnotherapist who also does counseling. And she was the one who said, that sounds a lot like grief. And she gave me this little worksheet that's like the 5 stages of grief. And I'm like, oh yeah, this matches up really interestingly. So that was helpful. I only saw her a couple of times, but it was great to be able to get just some insights and some frameworks, and also just to feel a bit like, other people are going through this. It's not just me in my head being attacked or whatever. It's like together, there is a lot of challenge going on in the world right now. And that gave me some help. It just made me feel a bit better internally. Externally, without even really being that aware of it, we did create routines that worked for us, for me personally, and for us as a family. So even though we were schooling from home, we sort of got the kids into a sort of routine. We weren't very strict with it, but it's like, get up in the morning, we'd have breakfast, we'd play a couple of games of the kids would do their work. They're of an age where it's like they're old enough to look after themselves, but they're not too big that they need heaps of help with really hard stuff. So it was actually kind of cool. They'd do that for a little while. They'd finish their schoolwork. Later in the afternoon, we would go to the beach because the beach was within our radius.
4.9 Ks. It's 4.9 Ks.
So we were
had
lucky.
A 5K radius.
That's right. And it was beautiful weather too. It wasn't summer here, so it wasn't hot. We had all these sunny days. And in a way, it was actually kind of beautiful going to the beach every day, slightly slower pace of other things in life. A lot of stress about the environment, but actually the behaviors were different. They were quite comforting. in what we did. I also did the classic, started baking sourdough. Lots of people did that. For me, I have actually tried that before, so it's not like just some random thing, but I got back into sourdough. And looking at it, again, that's like a routine thing. Every day, you got to feed the thing. And then when you want to bake, you got to put it in a certain time and get it out a certain time. And it's like quite rhythmic and sort of create structure around time. And I didn't do those things on purpose. I didn't think to myself, if I go to the beach every afternoon, I'm going to feel better. If I bake bread, I'm going to feel better. But it was almost just like what my body did to kind of deal with it was, oh, this looks interesting. How can we make that work? And that happened. And so I think part of it is I learned to just kind of trust that instinct can guide us. Instinct can step in sometimes where my brain cannot. And being a very brain-driven person, especially previously, that was a really a great experience, a great thing to be able to recognize.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I do remember feeling like there was such a sense of gratitude from all of us for the fact that we live so close to the beach. Again, not intentionally by design, other than this is my most favorite place on earth, and I was lucky enough to grow up down here. But yeah, just kind of living here going, we're 4.9 Ks from the beach. That means we can go to the beach anytime we want, and did. Was such a beautiful blessing of COVID. And you're right. Like, I think even just framing it as you did around the behaviors didn't necessarily match or feel like it matched the chaos of the environment. So the outside stuff, there was a lot going on, but internally, the actual behaviors that we had day to day as a family, they were much slower paced, and it was kind of beautiful, in some ways. When I lived in the moment, for me, I really enjoy when I look back on home learning and lockdowns, when I remember those times and basically getting our butts whipped by our daughter and, almost every day.
She won way more than her fair share of those games.
She absolutely did. Which
champion.
is what she loves. And that's beautiful. It's a great, that's a great memory for her to have.
And movie nights were every night instead of just Friday nights. It's like family movie night again. Yeah. And again, I know there's lots of people around the world who say the same stuff. There's a lot of stress, a lot of negativity, and there were some little bits and pieces of pearls in there that were really useful. And sort of skipping forward a bit, I definitely know when we did reopen properly and it's back to kids' activities every evening and going visiting people every weekend, I found that a struggle. I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so much stuff going on, all these people everywhere and so many things we've got to drive to all the time. So part of the challenge is literally just the change, right? And then when we're in a place, we can kind of learn the rhythms, find the things that work and get there. Sometimes change itself is the trickiest thing, I reckon, for me.
And so what are some other nuggets of gold that you learned throughout that season?
Yeah, so there was more things that happened. Another thing that I noticed is that after those sort of initial things that were rhythmic and I think was my body trying to create some systemization, some regularity, a couple of other things happened. I stopped listening to audiobooks about business, which is what I've always done in the past. And when I was walking up and down the beach by myself, I'd have my earphones in and I listened to novels. And it's like I knew for myself, this is just pure escapism. I'm just listening to things to get out of the stress of every day. And I don't care. I'm down the beach, I'm walking up and down, listening to some cheesy thing off Audible. And it was great. It was so interesting. That got me through a time of just feeling a little bit less stressed when I was able to do that. It was really nice. And another thing that happened is I took up watercolor painting, which I've never done anything like that before in my life. I've done a lot of design. I am a designer. I studied design, but never really played with paint or that kind of visual arts side of things, and certainly never watercolors. But I think even that in itself, it was my subconscious and my conscious kind of going, let's get used to how we can create something beautiful out of something that's hard to control. And for me, that was a deep lesson. It's like, it's difficult to control myself within the environment that's going on here. It's impossible to control the environment. And watercolor artists do this all day. They just sort of push water around a bit of paper and the paint goes all over the place. It's so weird trying to paint with water. You drip it all out, it just goes, you put a bit of wet stuff, it all seeps across. It's crazy. And yet, the lesson is there's chaos here and we paint with the water. The water helps the paint. It helps us to create something that's beautiful that we don't even know necessarily what it's going to look like. And so for me, it's like I spent a few months trying to paint with watercolors, having a bit of fun with it, never really getting particularly good or anything, but following a bunch of tutorials and messing around. And the whole time, the lesson for me was, yes, beauty can come from chaos. We can create things that are fun and meaningful and good out of circumstances that we can't control.
That's so beautiful. And I remember the first lesson that you did, you sharing with me about, it actually says you have to give up the need for control. And you were like, why?
I know, right?
Because
What have I got myself in for?
will we mention the brushes? Will we have that? We share with our listeners?
Like, let's just talk about it for a few minutes. But it was a typical
James
overthinking way of getting into.
I'm going to get into oil painting. I mean, watercolor. Fantastic. Yeah, rock on. Like I'm just like pro, you want to do something, thumbs up.
Spend the first 3 days just researching brushes, all the different hair types you can have, the different sizes, all this stuff. What am I going to buy off eBay?
Can we call a week 3 days? Can we call it 3 days? Because then remember
there was a lot of overthinking.
You know,
which
do I get
brand
this,
is the
which
best? Or you can get this one from Officeworks. And then I don't know if you remember, the very first lesson that I ever did was just sort of teaching you how to sort of gradate the paint. So it's like, you can put a little bit of paint in the water, it's light, and you can put a lot of paint in the water and it's dark. So the very first lesson ever, you draw up a grid on a bit of paper and you just sort of color it from light to dark with the same shade of blue. And so I'm like, oh, watercolor, so creative, so out of control. This is my first painting. And I'm showing Leash this picture of like 8 boxes of different shades of blue. And I was like, this is perfectly square and beautiful. Oh, I can get into this.
I could see you ruling it up with a ruler. I'm like, this is just hilarious.
Got a lot more splashy and creative from there. But it was the easy entry for overthinkers. That was good.
Beautiful. I love it. So what else did you learn throughout COVID that you want to share?
So one of the other things that happened for me quite deeply is that just before COVID, I'm a Christian. I've got a Christian background to my faith. Over the years, that has looked like different things at different points. And just before COVID all started, I started following a teacher who teaches sort of Christian business principles. He's a business teacher. He actually runs like $1 billion business here in Australia, who's also a very strong Christian. He knows a lot of the Bible and preaches a lot. So anyway, I started watching some of his stuff. And one of the things he talked about was taking a day out of work every week to sort of center yourself, to commune with God, to hear sort of the deep rumblings of your own spirit, as well as obviously for him in his faith, he's listening for God to sort of speak to him. And to just take a day out of business every week to do this. And I'm like super challenged by that. I'm like, I've got lots of work to do. I can't be taking a day off every week. Like, what is this? But as I kind of listened to him more and more, I thought, I'll give this a shot. A whole day still might be a bit too much of a stretch, but I'll take a morning off every week. I had started to implement that just as the rumblings of all the kind of COVID-y lockdowns and stuff started happening. And what I found was, I kind of felt like, before all that, even stepping back and trying to do something that was spiritual and calm, for me, had a goal. I wanted to do that so I could get better at business or have better insight into what was coming up next, or think more deeply about challenges and find excellent solutions. And I think what I found was sometimes stillness is just good for stillness's sake. I pray so that I can commune with God. And if God wants me to just sit there for 3 hours a week and just feel good and feel calm, that's kind of okay. And in the midst of all the stress and chaos that was going on, that was a real lifeline to me. It was like every week, graciously, Leash would let me leave the house for 3 hours. And again, within my 5K zone, all that sort of stuff, we're following the rules. But I would sit in the car privately for 3 hours, looking out over the beach, and just do some reading and some thinking and some praying, slow myself down quite purposefully. And as a habit, I have kept doing that ever since. I occasionally miss a week in things like school holidays when there really is just a lot going on. But almost every week I've been able to keep that up as a habit for 2 years or more now. And it's been absolutely amazing. I don't think of myself as a particularly spiritual person. I have a Christian belief, but I'm not like a deep meditator, or doing heaps of that kind of spiritual, emotional work. But maybe for me, that's why I needed to think about it as a business activity first. And then once I was into it, I could feel and see the benefits of it just for myself internally. And it helped to keep me calm, keep me centered, had meant I had something to look forward to when there was lots of chaos around. It's been an amazing journey.
That's beautiful. And, I think lots of people discovered lots of different talents and abilities and tried different things in lockdown that we just maybe never had the opportunity to do before. But what I'm continually hearing through your story is just that tendency to want to look for certainty, to look for this is how it is. I do this, it gets this.
Yeah.
Almost everywhere, almost everything you've done has been looking for that. But actually the gold is just in the being of that, even in the process of doing it, and just learning to be okay with that, learning to be okay if there's not an outcome, learning to be okay if it's not the plan that you were looking for. And, just like the water gets moved around in the chaos for watercolor, to be okay that, that too can be beautiful. It doesn't have to all be structured in order for it to be, really something beautiful.
Yeah. And, it's sort of cliche to say the journey is where it's at. It's not the destination. And I've certainly repeated that 100 times before and had some understanding of it. But it wasn't until I actually felt like the destination is never going to happen. And for a while I felt like that. I don't know if everyone did or if it was just me, but for a while it was like, that was where the rubber really hits the road, as far as really understanding that we have to take joy, and not just joy, but personal direction, or the who I am has to be in the journey. It's not a who I am as in I am creating something amazing and in the future I'm going to get to it and that's when I'm going to be good, or that's where I'm going to be in the right place. It has to be the right place is right now, as I create it, as I'm journeying, whether that journey goes up or down. Yeah. And so that's something that I can say I have taken out of the whole experience, that I think I still have within me, is more calmness around what might happen, what might not happen, and just knowing that I am okay being me within that, no matter which direction it goes. Not to say I don't get stressed about stuff. I'm not that superhuman, but there is a deep centeredness feeling of just, I have solid ground to stand on within myself, rather than thinking it's going to happen from something that I'll achieve at some point. That sounds super deep to say it like that, doesn't it? But it actually is true. It feels true.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Look, James, thank you so much for chatting with us today. I think your story of COVID it's an important one to hear. I think being able to hear everybody's stories throughout what they've experienced over the last couple of years is important. And by all means, the purpose of this podcast is not at all to minimize other people's experience, because not everyone's had such a positive one for lots of different reasons.
Of course.
And I still think that it's great to hear, from your perspective and from a man's perspective, what was it like to have to learn to live in the moment and to just go with the flow and embrace that because you had no other option. And to hear you get to become on the other side of that is really beautiful. So thank you for sharing your story today. It's been great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, no worries. I appreciate it.